Hello, everybody. Let me know if there's any technical problems, as we sometimes have here on my show. There's Quindy. I didn't get to see you guys last week, hang out and chat and stuff. I kind of missed that. I wasn't feeling too great. It doesn't seem like it's serious, but so I'm back now. And before we get into Kickstarter fever, I'm going to do some Kickstarter fever today too. But before we kind of go all Kickstarter all the time on this channel, I'm going to include some other stuff. So I'll switch views. Here we go. That's a little preview of what I'm going to work on today. Is the leprechaun. I'm going to talk a little bit about greens and some other stuff. But I will move this for now. Hold on. There's hair, and I'm afraid it will get in the view. So last week, I worked on some skin tones, but I worked on them using the paints that have released this month. So these were in the previous Kickstarter, so you may have gotten them there. But if you didn't, you can now go on the store and get them. And I was very excited to see these paints because they're kind of the equivalent in artist paints to yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and I think raw umber or burnt umber. One of the umbers. I keep every now and then I see this little meme that it's like, doesn't anyone around here know how to cook umber? And apparently we don't. So I started with these, and by adding just a little bit of white and or black, and then you'll also want to have like color complements of these, so a little bit of blue or a little bit of green, and you can get a slightly different result playing around with either. And that's a pretty easy way to mix skin tones. So if you're looking to have a condensed kit because you travel or because you only have a small space at home, in addition to, you want like a bright red and a bright magenta and a bright blue and all like, saturated colors like that you can mix from, these are three very useful colors that I would recommend for a mini kit because you can get a variety of skin tones. These two guys didn't turn out quite as different as I had planned originally. So I might mess around with this again sometime. But it, when I'm doing things on stream, sometimes I feel like I have to keep going instead of being a perfectionist, as I sometimes am. So I'm sure this is uploaded on YouTube now, and it's probably still on Twitch as well. So you should be able to rewatch that if you want to get some tips on how to make your own skin tones. These are examples of, before I started working on the miniatures, I just sat around mixing and goofing around, and these colors at the top or something else, but everything else here is pretty much me fooling with those three paints making skin tones. So and on that subject, actually, I painted this for Valentine's Day. I painted pink colors, and I do have a couple of the monster minis that I want to get back to sometime. But since it's still kind of St. Patrick's week, or the week after, I was going to do the leprechaun last Monday, and then I didn't. So I thought it was still valid to work on him. It's about as far past as it was before. So after I'd had fun mixing those skin tones, so that night I needed to warm up a little before painting something serious. So I'll often just grab a mini like this to try to finish off. And I worked on some skin tones and hair for her. And now I'm interested if you have an opinion of what color should her hat be. So it's like the classic wizard hat with the stars on it. So like, midnight blue seems like a logical choice, but I don't know if I should instead make it pink or really dark pink or kind of purpley pink to go with her dress, or I don't know. So if you have an opinion, let me know in chat, and maybe I'll work on that on a future stream. In the meantime, I will turn over to Kickstarter Fever. Hey, Kerniko, Green users, Tina Belcher. It's nice to see you all. So I showed these guys last time, and Reaper's been showing them on Reaper Live and stuff as well, but I'll show them off again, and then also the retail one. Well, you can't get them retail. The consumer ones, I don't know how you would put it here. We'll just squeeze a little halfling in there in between everything. Maybe it'll go better here. Better light. So these all for the bases fit together, which I'll show in a minute. I have a post up now, if you go to my blog, kind of talking about how I painted these. So some of the decisions, how I decided some of the colors, the order, and also some things I did wrong, because I think it would have been better for me. Like, I had some ideas for the colors. There was a famous character that you could probably think of that I was borrowing some colors from for this. I knew I wanted to use slightly duller or cooler colors on him, so I thought about blue from the beginning for him, because I knew the green would play well off of that. I'd painted something previously, but I hadn't really made a lot of decisions about these two, and I ended up having to paint these three to finish point first to get Ron a picture to include in an ad. And then I came back to the wizard. And I think when I did that, I really didn't think enough about integrating him. So he's got a few colors in common, but there's not a lot of the same greens that are on him on these guys. And there's none of that magenta on these guys. And then I could have pulled more color over from these. So I ended up making his like boots and pouches and that scabbard and stuff gray. And that does work well for the light effect, but I think it would have been better if I'd used, like, if you can kind of see the color of her pants is a little bit lighter than the color of her boots. If I'd used something like that for the leather, it still would have worked well with the spell effect, and I would have been able to light it up well, and it would have tied more into the other figures. But no one else seems to be complaining about that, so maybe I'm the only one who cares. I don't know. But right now I'm working on kind of more information about how I painted them each individually, and that will include the colors I use. So if there's some color combos that you really like, yeah, I'll have like the exact ones that I used in that post. Now, because, Ron sent them out to me in advance, which doesn't always happen, they are 3D prints. And you can tell because the bottom's flat. But if you get sent some of these, yours will be Bones Black versions. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because, actually, let's look at this lady first. Because her hammer broke off at the hand in transit to me. So it was broken before I even started painting. And that did add some complications to my life. And you are much less likely to have that happen with this Bones Black. So it's not brittle. It's sturdy enough, or no, hard enough that it takes detail well, but it's still flexible enough that you can abuse these guys in gameplay or transit or whatever, and they're still going to stand up, which these 3D prints might not as well. But let me zoom in just a little so that you can kind of, if you compare the detail on them, I think it's pretty similar in the end. All the detail on her chainmail and stuff. I don't think my camera is good enough to catch some of it. But if you go to the blog post, I included, high-res pictures, like the same that I would take of the painted figures, of the unpainted figures, so that you can, and I tried to get view angles where it was showing as many of the details as possible. Now, currently, the main way to get these is to make an order on the Reaper site. And they're including them in orders where they fit, I think. Kiriniko said, I had a 3D printed mini shatter on me recently. They're not fun to fix. Shatter? Wow, that sounds dire. Because most of the time when I have breakages, it is like this, and it's like a resin break, and resin's even more. Like every single time I've painted like person-size resin miniature, something has broken. I had one where it broke in like 3 pieces, but it glues together so clean that you can't tell after. If you can find all the pieces, which the second time this happened I could not, I had to find another hand and glue that on instead. But the first time I managed to find 3 tiny pieces of this little bow. And you can't tell on the finished miniature. And as we know from previous episodes, I am glue cursed. And she has this problem because I glued it on before I started, because I mentioned it to Ron, and he checked with Kevin, who does like the cleanups and does a lot of stuff with 3D prints, and he said, Kevin says if you just glue it on, it should be fine. And then my finger kind of spazzed while I was painting, and I flicked it off, and it's not fine. But I'll make it better later. I just wanted to like finish everything and get pictures before I try to get complicated about fixing it. So that's the dwarf, cleric. And I did show the human thief for a bit. And then I am also working on an article about how I did the lighting and how you can do even more striking lighting effects. Because with these figures, I had to kind of make a compromise. I had to balance the idea that they would look nice on their own like this, and then that they would look cool in the group. So basically that means I can't go as dark as I would go if I was making the lighting effect the primary consideration, and that means the lighting effect's not going to be as striking. It's not going to look like it's in as dark a scenario. Greengo said it was a dragon. I didn't realize it was hollow, and I applied a bit too much pressure. Fun times. Oh, so it was kind of like a Easter bunny. You had to glue back together an Easter bunny. Chocolate Easter bunny, I mean, not the actual Easter bunny with the eggs and whatnot. So this is the halfling fighter, and I think I mentioned last time, but it tickles me that Bobby made the fighter a halfling, because you don't see that a lot, but there's no reason you shouldn't, and I think it's fun. I mean, he's very fierce in his own way. And then my tip for you, which I may have also mentioned last time, is for both the halfling and the dwarf, they have their shield arms up a little, and it does make it a little harder to reach the face. You're kind of going to have to work around that a little bit. So I painted both of their eyes looking off to the side, which also works with eyes that are very small and you're having trouble painting them. Or if you have trouble, if you're trying to work fast, or you're still getting used to painting eyes, getting them both looking in the same direction is very difficult. But if you paint them off to the side, it almost always works. And this is the elf wizard. Well, just in case anyone's interested, there's the scale next to our buddy. Where's the production copy of the elf wizard? I decided on making the spell effect green way in advance. I painted a green source light spell effect before, so I was comfortable from that point of view. But also that if the torch was going to be a normal, warm, fiery red, orange type torch, then the green would stand out really well from that. Is why I did that. And then there he is from the back with some nice folds and stuff. So they are fun, and I'll get the production ones back to show how they fit together. Bobby Jackson was very clever. When I posted this on my Facebook page, and I did mention this to Bobby, I don't know if he took me seriously or not, though. I'll have to mention it again. One of my friends said, I call BS, no party is ever that organized. And I'm like, we're totally that organized when we're just wandering around. Like, we have a set marching order and all that. It's like, as soon as something happens, then it goes all to chaos. And I'm like, maybe Bobby should make these guys again, but in the chaos. What they would look like there. But that's how they all fit together. And then there is a fifth one that is this little goblin, this little sad, lonely goblin that I will also try to paint if I get a chance. And I guess I'll just be painting this one. Ron swears up and down that he sent me one. I'm like, well, he wasn't in my package. So I'll just paint this guy if I get a chance. But I'm working on something for Dark Sword before everything goes all Kickstarter all the time. So, and maybe, once we do go all Kickstarter all the time, maybe I'll work on some of these on stream if you guys would like that. Just paint them kind of a quick version of the same thing. Well, actually, before I get out, so this is my crummy one that I use while I'm painting because it's already had water damage. Okay, let me fix this a little for the OCD. Before I start painting the leprechaun, I'm just going to talk for a minute about some choices that I will make painting the leprechaun. So this is how I painted last year's leprechaun. Michael Proctor painted this year's leprechaun, if you see him on the webpage. So there were areas that were lighter green and there were areas that were darker green. So basically for the darker green, I just kind of, use this as my value range. And for the lighter green, I kind of use this as my value range, which is a perfectly valid thing to do. And certainly keeps things easy because I just had to have one set of colors and I could mix the one set of colors and I could paint both things. But we like to talk about contrast. And miniature painters tend to get obsessed with shadow highlight contrast. So stuff like, did I go dark enough in the folds of this cape and then light enough on the peaks? And that's certainly important. It makes the miniatures look three-dimensional. It shows the detail, like those little folds, and it shows, makes this staff look rounder. It does a lot of super important things. But we sometimes, that's like if someone says it needs more contrast, or you're feeling like something's off, that's the first place we go to, and it isn't the only problem that we've had. And I've talked about this before, but I do not remember exactly what shows. I feel like the shows where I was fixing, I was going back to a bugbear and blacksmith that I had painted and adjusting them. But it's also important to have contrast between different areas of the miniature. And I guess we'll just get one of these guys back. So like his face probably doesn't stand out as well as his face when you look at the figures. I mean, it's not too bad on camera actually, but in person I would say this guy's face. And that's partly, I was painting less contrast of the shadow highlight kind than I normally would because of the light. But also, this is surrounded by a very dark color, black. It's a very light color. And there's less of a jump. So the wizard is effectively, the skin's like this and the hair's like this. So that's a big jump between those two adjacent areas, and it draws your eye. So that's why, a book is black text on white paper, or a lot of people, you like dark mode, and then you're looking at white text on a black background, because then you have enough contrast to read the text. So if you want to break up the areas of the miniature so people can tell this is the face, this is the weapon, this is the armor, whatever, you need to have different kinds of contrast between those areas to help people see, especially from a distance, because the more I zoom out, let's look at those faces again. And which one do you see more easily? You see the wizard, because his hair is like this color and his skin is like this color. Whereas this guy, his skins are like this color and his helmet is like this color. So there's way less jump. So value is, hi Monster Den Minis and Val Under the Red. Value is a really useful tool for creating that contrast between areas. But it's not the only one. So when I painted the leprechaun last year, I did mainly rely on value. But for this guy, I'm going to add in a couple things to the mix. Well, I'm going to add in one thing to the mix, I guess. So these are the greens that I picked out. Whole mess of greens. And I will probably, as ever, use blue liner. But I picked them out kind of as two separate sets of green. And if you look at them, you can probably guess what the difference is. If you've been looking at colors for a while. And if you haven't, I'm going to explain. And the difference is some of these greens are more yellow and some of them are less yellow. So it's really like I have a set of greens that is yellow green on the color wheel and a set of greens that is more true green on the color wheel. So then I'm also adding a little bit of hue contrast. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have areas of the guide that are lighter greens and areas that are darker. So that will help those areas stand out from one another. But I'm also going to have the lighter areas are going to have more yellow and the darker areas are going to have less yellow, which will help it stand out in an additional way. Then for his beard and stuff, beard and hair, and maybe the mushroom, I'm not sure yet. I think I saw some orange mushrooms when I was looking. I'll probably use orange, which, that's further away. If I made it blonde, that's not as far away from the greens on the color wheel. So if I go orange, that's further away. And then I also have the very helpful thing. If you see this triangle here, this becomes, 2/3 of a triad. So then I know I have purple as a color if I need it. So maybe I do purple on the mushrooms. Maybe I do purple in the shadows of the skin, or even the shadows of the blue. But I know that I have one color that's going to harmonize with those colors if I need some additional color for something. Valander the red. I got lucky. I have a sample paint that is a perfect light Kelly green, like a 2-to-1 mix of grass green and jade green. That does sound nice. So that is how I picked out these colors. And then the orange too, and also because it makes sense for a leprechaun to kind of be red-headed. Although I was debating being radical, and since I've been practicing so much with darker skin, painting him with darker skin instead of the typical peaches and cream type skin that we would give a leprechaun. Since in like a D&D world, he's not limited to one cultural area, I don't think. I think they wander around causing trouble everywhere. So I do have to divide actually now, bring these back. I have to divide them into the more yellow and the less yellow. And I'll put them in 2 separate containers so I don't get distracted on stream, as I so easily do. I think that was my set. Maybe this one went up here. I don't know. This kind of is like an in the middle green. So I could use it in both of them. I could use it for like the shadow of this one. And then just as part of that one. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. How did I paint the freckles on last year's leprechaun? So I painted the skin. Then I used stipple dots to paint the freckles. Freckle color, which was probably something kind of like it's probably written down on my blog. But it would be like a redder or brownie or skin tone. And then I also use skin colors for stippling. I would first try do the stipples and then do a glaze of your skin color over it. Because what you want is, you don't want the freckles to look like they're on top of the skin. You want them to look like they're underneath the skin. And this is true of tattoos as well. And a glaze with your original skin color is a very easy way to accomplish that as a rule. I think when I did it, I wasn't 100% happy with it. I wanted to make sure the freckles showed up as freckles and it didn't look like blotchy skin. So I ended up stippling back and forth with the skin color and the freckle color. Which I do not remember the colors. The only reason I know these colors is because I wrote them down. But it is in the blog post about that guy. So if you go search for, what the heck was his name? Finn Greenwell. If you go search for Finn Greenwell on my blog, you should find the post that lists the exact colors. And I'm probably going to do some different kind of stippling here. Oh, and in case anyone wants a size comparison for this guy next to our old friend, there it is. I don't know that I'm actually going to even paint anything on the mushroom today, but we'll see. You guys know I end up being slow because I stop and talk and explain things and stuff. Not that I'm like a zippy bear when I'm able to focus. I can paint a little faster than I used to, just to give the slow painters hope. There's hope. You will get faster over time. But I actually recommend doing like tabletop and speed painting and stuff like that. And it helps you figure out what's important. All right. And I have to figure out how to fit everything on here. I am also, I should have not zoomed in yet. I still have my other palette around. But since I didn't have any, on the go paint colors on this new exemplar palette, I thought I would give it a shot. And this is the exemplar palette and sponge, but just regular old Reynolds, or in my case I think Kroger, parchment paper. And I do look at how nice and smooth that is compared to the wrinkles that you get on the sponges with holes. So I like that a lot. And the fact that these little wrinkles are coming up is like a clue that I need to add more water. So it's really easy to tell about my hydration level as well. And that might even be too much water. It takes very little compared to my old sponge and paper towel setup. I'm going to pour off just a little. And then I didn't get all the little, if you get all the little bubbles out, it helps because then everything's in contact and the paint should stay wet longer. But I don't know if, what I don't know yet, because it's the first time I've done it, is whether the paint will stay as moist, apologies to people who don't like that word, with this palette paper as with the one that it's made for. You know, that if there's something special about their palette paper as well as about their sponge. So actually, I'm going to put this, since I will have this sideways, I'm going to put them on the end of the palette paper. Someday I'll figure out how to fit everything on my desk, but that day is not today. It's very much not today. That is the downside of this palette and why I hadn't been using it on the show previously, apart from needing the colors for other projects. It is just a hair longer. No Time for Bull asks, did you keep a pre-1964 penny in your wet palette to help with mold? I think I thought it was actually 1984. But yes, I did have copper pennies, and I had copper sheet that you can buy at the craft store for, I think it's like kinds of sculpting you can use it for even. And then this, you can kind of see under the paper, this lighter strip, they sent like a copper foil sticker with this palette. But with my previous palette, it had gotten to the point where that was not helping enough. If I left my palette, and I'm kind of notoriously bad about, I'll finish a project and think I'm going to start painting on something again right away, and I am wrong. Because I'll get distracted and go do all the things I didn't do while I was working on a deadline. Like even I had the palette, because I was painting the other day to paint that Giselle's skin. And I was like, oh, well, I got to paint some stuff. I'll get back to that. And then it ended up being like almost a week, and I had to open it. I mean, it didn't go funky because it's the new palette, but things had like way dried out, and I had to rinse everything out and stuff. So and for years I think that did help. So and I've tried using like bleach and alcohol and stuff on the actual like palette plastic and getting, a brand new sponge and all that stuff. And I just can't seem to make the Masterson not go funky anymore. So for this darker color, I'm not going to use like a real yellowy white to mix highlights, which I normally would with green, keep it more vibrant. But because this is kind of more of a jade style green, I will use Vampire Pallor, and just white would be fine too, probably. I'm not going to mix as many intermediary mixes as I usually do, and we'll see what happens. I am going to mix one with the blue liner, because blue liner is some potent stuff. Assuming I can get my blue liner to come out. The thing I hadn't tried as much is I bought this at ReaperCon. This company had a booth there. But when I got home and read the instructions, the ratio was 16 drops per ounce of water on setup, and then add a little more when you top off the water. And my old palette sponge combo with the paper towels, there's a lot of water in there. So I would go through that very rapidly. So that did not seem like a very ideal solution to the problem in the end. But I think for this, which takes so much less water, that it will be worth it for me to use that as an answer. Where did my little guy go? So this I want to be the darker side. Maybe I will mix a combo between that. So when I did this and I talked about using, one part of the thing to the other part of the thing, part of what's going to make a section look darker if you're doing it this way is you're going to have, these are going to be very small areas, And then this is going to be wider areas, and then the reverse. If you're painting a lighter color, this is going to be kind of the bulk of things, and this is just going to be in the deepest shadows. So I need a fairly dark starting point color. And I want something in between basilisk green and dragon green. Because I feel like the dragon green is just a smidge lighter if I want to keep this a really nice dark green. And maybe I'll end up working on mushroom in between while things dry. But yes, to anyone who wants to do the penny trick, you can look up online when they change the formula of pennies to have less copper, because throwing a penny in that you get at the bank today is not going to help you at all. And I don't know if you can see it on camera, but the trim on his hat are tiny little shamrocks. So those I will paint in the lighter green. They could go in like gold. Like gold is a great accent color for this color combination. That's what I used on last year's Leprechaun on Finn. And I like I used even sort of a dull gold on like his socks and stuff. The few areas that needed to be, not green. Because you can't paint every single piece of gear on one of these guys green. And I thought that it was a good combo. So I will be torn about whether to paint those shamrocks green like plants. I mean, he's a leprechaun. He could have actually stuck little shamrocks to his hat with magic or something. Or if I would rather paint them like gold trim type things. And if you have an opinion about that, you can share it, and I will attempt to do that. Not that I know for sure if I'm going to get to the trim today, but it's possible since I'll have do the lighter greens after. So my plan is to make his hat and his vest and pants. And there's some detail in there that I cannot see with these specs, so that's a I'll work it out later problem, because I don't always want to torture you guys with exactly how I would paint if I were doing this. I mean, I would do the things that were underneath first, so I'd actually paint his belt first. And there's a little bit of shirt showing. And there's a little bit of cat hair showing. Somewhere I had tweezers. Allender looked it up. Pennies were 90% copper or more until 1942, and then again from 1944 to 1962. Wait, 62 to 82, the metal was different, but also more than 90% copper. Yeah, so that's, I think I had a 60s penny and an early 80s penny in my whole thing. I mean, if it was just a smidge closer, I could grab it and look. Alas, it is not. So I'm going to paint his coat the lighter green, but I'm going to paint the bottom part that sticks up darker green just so it's clear what that is. So yes, if I'd been sensible, I would have started the base coat before I was talking to you guys and stuff. No, I don't think that would be done. Since 1982, they've been copper-plated zinc, which I would guess is either cheaper or more durable. Just going to put some blue liner in crevices. So then if I end up not being able to reach them, it will still be fine. Oh, I this one paint like? I can fool around with the orange on the mushroom. So I'm sure have seen those classic mushrooms where it's like a red cap and then white spots. When I was looking online, I saw a couple of those that were a little more orange, and then I saw some other mushrooms that were like completely orange, and they were kind of cool looking. This, I think I'll just go up for my darker color. And since I didn't bring one, I will use some of this oxide brown. I might have to add some blue liner too to make it real dark, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, I don't think that's super dark. So are all of you excited about the Kickstarter coming up? Have you got Kickstarter fever yet? Oh, Valander, I would think I'd rather have the mushroom color be interesting to the figure than to have it be correct to the location. I've decided that my leprechaun is not confined to Ireland. He lives in a fantasy setting, so he can go wherever he wants. Well, within whatever the rulebook says about leprechauns, I guess. Which I did not look out. But I think we did meet one once in Reaper Errant. We met some kind of mischievous little fey creature. Now I'm not remembering exactly what it was. I did feel like it was St. Patrick's week last week when we were playing, though, because the dice actually did not poop all over me. So that is new. Every now and then the dice are not horrible to me. I mean, they're usually a mix, really. But Valander said the coolest looking mushroom species in Ireland are all poisonous or hallucinogenic. I think that's exactly the kind of mushroom that a leprechaun would hang out with. No time for bull. I love the dragons they've already shown. Yes, as a dragon fan, even though I never paint them, I too think the dragons are super cool looking. Daka Flocka Flame. I'm telling myself that I'm not going to go as crazy this Kickstarter, but I suspect I'm lying to myself. Well, lying to ourselves is how we get by with these kinds of things, isn't it? But, and I haven't, not actually, I don't have a lot of insider intel on this. You know, I've been watching Reaper Live every week, the same as everybody else, because I'm curious what they're going to show previews of. I mean, I knew about the promotional figures, but those are not a secret. I think they showed them, you know, even while I was painting them, they were showing those. I just didn't think I was allowed to show off the painted versions yet. I have one thing that I'm working on that I haven't shown you guys, but they have shown that figure. So it's not a secret figure. I just don't know if I'm allowed to show the paint job yet or not, which is not complete because I shifted from that to the puzzle party, as somebody was calling them last show. So I'm going to try to check with Ron before next Monday whether I'm allowed to show you guys where I am with that figure. And I actually happen to have a second copy of that one. Because I don't know why. Ron sent me one. I guess maybe because he hadn't seen anything. He didn't think he'd sent it. And I'm like, no, you sent it. I just haven't finished it. So he sent me a second one. And that one, it's in metal. It's not like they do a bunch of extra 3D prints or anything. Which I think is one reason he's like, oh, did I throw this in? I don't even know. I'll throw this in. And so I might be able to like paint it on the show while the Kickstarter's on, And we're all deep in the throes of Kickstarter fever. I'm trying to... Okay, it is. Oh, so this is not a coat with sleeves. This is like a really long vest. Because I was like, why does this coat have weird little cuffs like that? Now, I'm sure if you preferred, you could paint the coat as the sleeves in the coat. You just pretend that was like a big seam. It's not so pronounced on the sculpt that you can't make that choice. But I'm going to go ahead and make the choice to paint it the darker color. There's where the seam is. Because when I was first started putting on the paint, I was like, oh, I feel like the sleeves are part of this underneath outfit. And I was like, oh, but then connects to the coat. But now I have figured it out. I often use a higher magnification level because I'm very old now. It was funny. It started when I was like, when I went in for my eye exam, because I've had bad eyes since I was like 10 or something. Sooner than that, it just took them a while to notice. But anyway, I went in when I was 38, and the doctors are like, yeah, you're probably going to need bifocals in the next couple of years. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That is for people who are 60? Why are you doing this to me? And he was like 100% accurate. I got bifocals when I was 40. And what I hadn't realized that when I was in the store looking at miniatures, I'd be like this to see the blister. And I was doing that more and more as the years went on. I didn't have to do that when I first started painting. Although I've always used a magnifier to be able to see detail. It makes it easier to paint eyes and stuff like that. And prep, I mean, I use it the most for prep in some ways to make sure I'm catching all the little mold lines and whatever else. Let's see. Do I have my hairdryer close? We could do a hairdryer break. So I'm going to take the sound off. Getting old is better than the alternative. You're right, Rasmus. My husband always says that too. No time for bull. I'll be likely getting the Egyptian expansion. The dragon sound will probably be it, but who knows? I might be lying to myself as well. I'm very excited about the Egyptian expansion. Way back when I first got into painting Reaper minis, I got a lot of the Warlord Egyptian figures, and I actually told myself I was going to paint like a skirmish group or whatever and play the game, and then I realized like it's all mummies and a million mold lines, and oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So that didn't happen, but I think I painted a few of them, but I do still like the Egyptian stuff a lot. Maybe I'll get to paint some for this Kickstarter. So I'm going to get my... This is the same old question as usual. Someday I'll make a new paper. So you can ignore the question even if you want. We'll just do that. But I'm going to turn the sound off just for a sec and hair dry. All right, I'm back. And that's one of the things I like about putting the figures on stuff like this. I can hold multiples of the... I think I've even held 3 of these at a time to hair dry. That's more TVs. Mummies and Mold Lines was my Robin Hitchcock and the Egyptians cover band in college. All right. Well, I didn't 100% get that done, but we'll start with this guy then, because he is 100% dry. Gotta make him more orange. Although orange-brown, in terms of being a color complement, if you're painting something a little less vibrant than a show-off leprechaun, it totally works from a color theory point of view. Saffron Sunset is my secret weapon for red hair. I mean, like really red, not strawberry blonde or whatever. It is a great color to highlight those kinds of colors with. I feel like I must have a bigger brush here somewhere. Maybe that's too big. My Reaper 2. A little big. I don't know. One looks a bit better. I'm not going to worry about getting stuff on the little spots because I'm going to have to cover all that over anyway. And typically, I do tend to operate from the, paint the majority of it now and worry about the rest later point of view. Try to get a bit of a mix between my brown and my orange here on the edge here. Maybe he needs to be more vibrant. I think he does. He's a pretty crazy little guy. My understanding, although I do not recall if I've gone to, checked everyone's pictures if they're posting, is that there are different versions of this guy. So you might get a different version of him when you order. And that sounds cool. And I think Ron said they were gonna put the different versions out as a pack so you can get just a bunch of mushroom guys if you want, because I'm pretty sure that many of us need a bunch of different mushroom guys. Some of the saffron sunset in from the beginning. I usually find that when I try to do wet and wet stuff like this, I will have to go at it a couple of times or come back and fix things. So wet blending can be faster, but it's not magic in my experience. At least not that style of wet blending. I don't know if there is a style that's magic. Because I can see places where the orange that's kind of like one up from the starting color, I can see that it's not very opaque as it starts to dry. So that's the kind of reason I would find that you need to come back in with wet blending. Also, it's hard for me to tell whether some of the gray parts are the dots or around the edges of dots or whether it's on the main cap. So I'm just going to let that dry and figure it out later. Let's see where I am with this guy. I'm going to put in a bit of shadow. A few spots. And I'm going to try something fun with the hat. One thing that would be cool to do with this is decide on my light direction, because the peak of this hat is kind of like a corner. So, do I have anything square? Everything is round. Interesting. All right, so pretend this is the corner of more of a cube or something, cube or triangle. If I had the light coming from this direction, this plane is going to be a lot lighter than this plane. So if I did that here, instead of the center of the hat, if it was like a slope, you'd probably put the highlight here and then slope back to darker colors. But here, it's going to look more interesting if I make one side lighter and one side darker. Which we'll see if that works with the fun thing I was going to do. But then it would also behoove me to keep that lighting choice in mind as I paint other parts of the figure. I'm not going to worry too much about that part because it might have to be redone after stippling anyway. Maybe, okay, I'll just add a little bit of lighter color here first. And then if I do the same in this direction, here and here, I think. Yeah, it's going to hit the edges of everything. But. And greens are, you know, they're not quite as bad as reds, but they are on the more transparent side. They can be annoying like that. So multiple coats are a thing. Even for like shadows and highlights as a rule. And these sleeves only got one coat of base color, so I'm going to hit them before I continue. Because you can see how much lighter that looked when I put the wet paint on, and then it dries a lot darker because it's kind of semi-transparent and some of the underlying surface is showing. And that will probably happen again with this. It's not going to look as light as that once it dries. Then what I'm going to do is, if you are a regular watcher, you may remember episodes where I was working on testing various dry brushes, and I had tested these weird ones. Well, actually, I didn't test the rosemary because I didn't have that at the time, but I tested the Army Painter ones, and then Artist Opus makes these. I think they kind of came up with it, and Rosemary probably made the brushes, but I'm not 100% sure. But I all found this, which is a bristle brush, and I think it may be a real bristle brush, which means it's made from the bristles of hogs and typically used for oil paints. But I think it might work, and it's a good size. So I might goof around with that, plus it's cheaper. So I got a set of these for I don't remember how much now on Amazon. And this was the biggest one, so that's a lot. But I got a set of like 5 of them. So it's Royal and Langnickel Moderna brushes. And it was like a set of 5. And so if you can't get the fancy style, although the Army Painter is not, you can get 3 brushes for $20. That's not that expensive. And that's the softer kind of bristle. But this is a stiffer bristle, but interestingly, because hog bristle doesn't always do well with, it softens in water. It's not that it doesn't do well in water. It softens in water. That's one reason I think they use it in oil painting, is because it behaves differently with like oil paints and solvents than it does with water-based paints. And water is our solvent in water-based paints. So I'm stippling on the color that I painted there, the lighter color. And again, as this is more transparent paint, I will probably have to do multiple coats. The reason I'm doing stippling on this hat, I realize now I forgot to explain that, is this looks like the kind of hat that is made from felt, and felt will have that kind of speckly, stipply appearance. Plus, texture is another way of adding contrast between areas. So that I talked about how you can use value and you can use hue. With the color wheel, But texture is also a good tool. Plus, it is fast and fun to do. So you can make arguments this would also work for some kinds of wool. This is the technique that I used on that gingerbread man from Christmas. Although he is a Christmas miniature that is still available because he was up on USA Mini. I'm not rinsing my brush in between. Just as with many other kinds of dry brushing, it can help it kind of go together, and also it just saves time. I will eventually want to rinse it so that it doesn't, if the paint gets too dry, it'll get chalky and stuff. So putting into practical use things we were testing in those dry brushing episodes, which I do. I wanted to paint wood. I had like the Brian Wind docks from Kickstarter 5 pulled aside. I wanted to repeat my dry brushing tests on those. And then I realized, now that I'm saying this, I don't think I ever posted on my blog the results of test 2 and 3, which I have all the pictures for. I just didn't sit down and type it up. So to do that thing with the plane, I'm going to stop putting much more on this side and focus the lighter stuff on, to create the light effect now. So now I'm not just creating a texture thing. I want to put some attention on simulating light. But edges of things typically catch light, so I do want to hit edges a little. Now, certainly you can do stippling the hard way, which I did. So the gingerbread guy is a mix. So I did this kind of in the big areas, and then I used a small brush and stippled for blending or to get it into spaces where it wasn't going where I wanted it to be, or stuff like that. As ever, it kind of depends on what the function of your object is, how much effort you're going to put into it. That seemed a little abrupt, so maybe I didn't get enough paint off. I mean, the nice thing is if I do decide that it's too much, I can come back in with the previous color and just kind of blend in the stipples, which is sort of what I was talking about with the freckles, only that's doing it the by hand brush way. I think I'm probably done with that bigger size brush. And there's the downside of dry brushing, is I don't know if you can see there's green. There's green down there in the ferrule where we don't want the paint, but I will address that later. Just try and leave it wet so it doesn't dry. And get the littler one to add a little bit more refinement. Catch this area a little more. And the brim, the big brush didn't really seem to be getting into the crown. Is that, I don't know the parts of hats. But I think it's probably the crown. So I'm holding it in this direction and angling the brush this way because I'm kind of pretending to be the light. So if I'm saying the light is coming from this direction and I'm not even holding it so I can't get to those parts, then it helps me focus attention where I think the light would hit. Because I think you can do plenty of light direction and stuff on tabletop minis with dry brushing. What you have to control a little more is washing, because washing is indiscriminate. I may decide that this is a little bright, but what I would do in that case is come back in with the glaze. We can also come back in with darker stipples. That is certainly valid too. I'm going to check in on the mushroom though. See if we're ready for more wet blending. So that is how it dried, which certainly I can see. I don't know if you guys can see it. I think you can, even on the camera. There's some gray under there showing through, because I was trying to do everything at once, and that's, well, it's actually not gray, it's the darker brown, but I still was trying to do too much at once. But that's fine, it's just a second go with the lighter colors. This time I'm starting with kind of like my second lightest color. I'll go around the edge with a slightly darker one. I'll paint on my brush. And hopefully those edges will meet a bit. And then I'll come back in the middle with my lightest color. Stippling will probably work on the mushroom too, because when I was looking at pictures of mushrooms, there were certainly plenty of textured ones. But I'm going to reserve the stippling for the hat, in the belief that it will help draw attention to the leprechaun's face, to have some detail and noise close to his face, but less on other areas. I think there's going to be a little bit of an edge between, but that's also something I can look into later. So I'm not saying that I want to paint the mushroom cap necessarily butter smooth. I just don't want to go like full scale nuts with the texture there, I don't think. You guys would get so bored and sleepy if you watch me paint things butter smooth. I did start to go a little crazy after a while with the adventuring party, because I was kind of, when I started painting it, and this is in the blog, but you know, guess I'll give you a spoiler. But smooth was kind of like a very popular style when I first started painting, an alarmingly large number of years ago, 2003, I think. And certainly it always attracted me as a style, and I've tended to paint more smoothly than not. It's a little less in vogue right now. Everybody's very happily exploring textures and stuff, which I think is super cool. I don't know if I quite agree with Banshee's F Smoothness manifesto, because I am Bender the Blender. But I understand the point of what he's talking about. That shouldn't be the only style that's acceptable in miniature painting. It shouldn't be the only way that we paint. Absolutely 100% agree. I've also had a lot of fun with textures, like I was doing just now on the hat. I don't know, when I got those miniatures and I saw them, they just gave me like a bit of an old school vibe, like computer games and earlier days of painting. And so I just had what is the Smoothness manifesto? Banshee has a motto, F Smoothness, and it's the actual word, and I know we can say things on Twitch, but I'm going to choose not to at this time. And that is a reaction to the idea that, you know, I don't think it's true of every contest or whatever, and it's been a few years since he started that, so I think that what he was talking about has become more mainstream and more in the vogue of having more texture and stuff. I'm just trying to make sure this brush is actually dry. It rhymes with duck. Yes, that word. And hold on, I need just a little more of grass green. So I 100% understood what he was talking about, and I don't disagree with the opinion. I think the way of saying it seems a little aggressive and attacky towards people like me, but then I think that's partly to get attention, because people tend to pay more attention when you make things shocking. But in any event, I felt like painting smooth, so I did. But then when I got to the non-metallic metal, I started having major life regrets. Well, honestly, I would paint like non-metallic metal that way regardless of the miniature type, probably, unless I was doing like a real intentional texture thing. But it was not the work of a moment. I'll say that. And I was wondering if I had lost my dang mind to decide to do that. Lizard the Tree Wizard says, I love this green. Let me see if I can remember what colors I use so that you can grab some if you need them. So there's Dragon Green, Basilisk Green. Basilisk is the darkest color. I mixed those two together for kind of my initial starting point. So the color that's on his vest and stuff that I haven't painted at all is those two colors mixed together. Grass Green. Retro Emerald is a special edition color, promotional color. But if you mix these two together, you get something very similar. I have some of this, but I've ended up not going that light, because this is supposed to be the darker green, so I'm actually darkening up a little now, and then some blue liner for the shadows. Darker greens for the shadows would be fine too, but blue works really well as a shadow, particularly on those greens that are a little less yellowy, although if you go kind of more blue-green in the shadows and yellow-green in the highlights, that helps your shadow highlight contrast if you so wish it. So I'm just actually trying to add back a little darkness. And I've chosen to stipple rather than glaze, because the glazing would take down the texture too. So if you didn't want this much texture, that would be a way to accomplish that, is glaze over it, and it would tone down the texture. But I was going for some texture, so I'm gonna just add more with the stipple brush. And then this is the kind of thing where if I was painting this as this year's Leprechaun, which was painted by Michael Proctor, if you go look on the website, I would probably at this point switch over to a small brush and start doing stuff like making decisions by hand to be more precise about it and stuff. And I guess if I were painting this for tonight's game, I might just say good enough for now and stop doing this right now. I feel like we need a little more dark right here. Because this is supposed to be the darker green, so I don't want to lose too much of that. All right. So that is a little stippled hat. Other than, it's still got the trim. That is going to be different color one way or another, whether it's the light green, which now I'm not sure about because I don't know if it's going to be enough contrast. But you don't always want freehand and details like that to be super contrasty. Like if I have too much stuff going on here, then you might not look at his face enough. So I might need to wait until I had more of the miniature finished to make that decision of what color do I want. Well, no, I'll do that part later. What I was going to do was start putting dark lines around places where his skin and hair meet the hat. But I will first go work on adding some shadows to his outfit because it is the same color, but I'm going to use more layering techniques so the texture is going to look different. To look for little wrinkles as well. Because that will help you see kind of the shapes of the cloth. And I mean, I think wrinkles very much are part of what makes us look at something and see cloth. Those particular cloth folds. If you study drawing, they will even, and I'm sure the sculptors all know this stuff, there will be courses on painting folds, and it's like there's like 7 different kinds of folds depending on how, what's causing the material to wrinkle. And so they'll go over those so you kind of know the physics behind what's happening to know where to put the darker colors and the lighter colors and stuff like that. But sculptors have kind of done all that work for us, so we don't have to do that as much. I don't think it would be unhelpful for miniature painters to do that, but I don't think we have to do it because the sculptors do so much work for us. I wonder if Bob and Julie are confirming in the chat that they know all the 7 kinds of folds inside and out because they have to make them all the time. And they sculpt lovely cloth folds. Actually. I very much enjoy Bob and Julie's approach to cloth. And a lot of Bob's cloaks are, the way he does folds makes it very accessible to techniques like dry brushing as well as the way I paint. So because this is so dark, I am going pure blue liner in the folds of the cloth. If I were doing this with a little more care, I would probably thin that down some, but today I think it is better to be fast than not. Tree Wizard has to go get ready to head out the door. Well, I'm glad you were able to come and hang out with us for a while. Thank you. Green Users is lurking today. The sculpt is fighting. Oh no, that's not good news. I guess I'm consoled to know that doesn't just happen to painters. But then I'm sad that my friend is struggling. So there's little cuffs on there that I'm trying to make sure I get blue liner around. I think maybe that's a pocket watch. That's a thing that I need my closer up magnifiers to figure out. So I'm just gonna not even pay attention to it right now. Which is another tip for tabletop miniatures, or if you're just starting out, you don't have to paint all the tiny little detail. If it's not obvious what it is once you get the base coat on it and you can kind of cover it up, go ahead and leave it that way if you want to. If you need to for speed, or if you just don't want to deal with all the detail. Even if I didn't paint the little doodahs on his hat and I put them on the game table, you can't even tell there's doodahs on the hat. So who cares? Ballender says, as someone who stumbled on Lizard the Tree Wizard a couple of weeks ago, she's a brilliant new painter. Oh, okay. Does she stream as well then? That is not a great angle for that hat, is it? All right. Now I'll start adding some highlighting. And again, this is meant to be the darker one, so I need to try to restrain myself and keep the highlights to smaller areas. It's just to bring out the folds and the shapes and stuff like that. It's not... The highlights are not the main story on this color. They will be more important on the lighter green. Ballinger Red said, yes, you just rated the stream. Oh, I guess I missed the raid notice. Oh, well, if there are any friends of Lizard the Wizard here, thank you for rating us and hanging out. I usually catch the raid notices because they're big and noticeable. But I'm trying to paint faster for you guys today because I know that sometimes it takes me forever to do stuff and it's boring. Although I am kind of wondering, are any of you... Do any of you wish I'd do stuff occasionally more like Anne, where I paint like an entire miniature start to finish instead of this thing where I paint like 2 parts on a guy and then you never see him again? I am considering occasionally streaming on my own to finish stuff up because I am troubled by how many half-finished dudes I have lying around. It is more than I used to have. So this is the grass green, I think. Oh. Okay, he does have a little thing on his nose. I think I must have scratched him by accident when I was getting the mold lines and stuff. So I probably got him with the end of my scalpel or something. So I'm using a 0 today. And I might even use a smaller brush if I was trying to be real persnickety about it, just to help me keep the highlights to a smaller area. So let's see. Ballinger likes how my show is distinct from hers. Because it seems like most people, that's what they do on a show, right? Is just kind of paint from start to finish. And then for some reason, that is not what I'm doing. But they get to finish things and I don't. But perhaps I will just donate some of my half-painted guys to paint and take or something. Although I've noticed when I run paint and take locally that people don't want to paint miniatures that already have some paint on them. Even if it's decent paint. Weird but true. So the lighter colors in this, because this was the green that I picked out to not have a lot of yellow in it. So the lighter colors have a lot of white in them. So they are, of course, much more opaque and much easier to go chalky or have transition lines or whatever than the middle and dark colors. Tasmania wants me to be at my most comfortable to get all my secrets from me. Well, I've become much more comfortable streaming than I thought I would be. I don't know if I have any secrets other than persistence. I mean, general color knowledge, which I try to share with you guys all the time. Because it certainly helps to figure out a few color things. Like just understanding that if the paint has white in it, it's going to be more opaque. And that so the middle greens and the dark greens aren't ripping you off. It's not that they don't have a lot of pigment in them, but it's also that's why they might be easier to work with than
the lighter greens. So there's kind of a trade-off of stuff. Well, maybe that is a wrinkle on the thing and not a missing little bit. I feel like I should have put some stippling under that brim there, but I guess unless you do this, you're never going to notice, right? We'll hope that that is true. So I am up to, what color am I up to? The Retro Emerald, which is a special edition color, not currently available. But I am fairly confident that if you mix like Ghost Fire, even if you just mix like linen white or something like that into the grass green, you would get something very similar. And I remember Retro Emerald when it was not retro and it was in Pro Paints, and it was a very nice color. That year, I think the Reaper colors, several of them were resurrected versions of the Pro Paints. So they wouldn't be exactly the same because the stuff they mix the pigment into, the base, the medium, is a different formula now. So, and there are some colors where if that changes, you're not going to be able to make the color exactly the same because it's not just pigments. It's partly to do with that as well. I don't know exactly why. That's one of those things that I just kind of need to know that it is. I don't need to know why it is. There are a lot of things that are kind of like that about paint for me that I'm okay not knowing the like physics or whatever behind it. I need to know just enough to know that I'm making my life difficult if I'm frustrated about a given thing. Or sometimes I just have curiosity about how stuff works. But not enough curiosity to extend to actual chemistry. Because that's kind of like math. All right, so I put a little of the Ghost Fire on those highlights, but I kind of stopped a little lighter than I thought. I mean, a little darker than I thought I would, because this is supposed to be the dark green, and I think we're running out of dark green. I feel like his hat has gone a little lighter than I wanted, but we might be just calling that a different color green than the rest of his outfit. Because the same thing is true when I'm talking about paints, and how, if you use a different base and you add the same pigments, it's not going to end up the same. If you use the same dye on the felt as you use on the wool or whatever his outfit would be made from, it's also not going to be exactly the same. So that is fine. So for the lighter green, I picked out Cat's Eye Green, Alchemical Green, which is a Pathfinder color, Alien Goo, and Dungeon Slime. And you notice that I have kind of had a few more the bones paints, because they're a little more opaque, and for greens that makes it a little less frustrating. But green, I'm kind of picky about green, so I did pick a lot more by color than by was this a more opaque paint or whatever. And in this case, I was picking these ones to have more yellow. If you weren't here at the beginning, if you were here at the beginning, you already know this. If you weren't here at the beginning, instead of just using, focusing more on the lighter side of the greens that I already mixed, which would certainly be a valid way to paint the lighter green, and that's how I painted the leprechaun from last year. I picked paints that have less yellow in them for the darker color green, and then paints with more yellow in them for the lighter color green, so that I'm also having a little bit of color contrast as well as value contrast. And then we did the texture contrast of the hat. So you're seeing the power of other kinds of contrast than shadow highlight contrast in action. But I need one of these for, I think grass green was kind of my bridge. So that'll be my shadow color for the light parts, I think. Now, this may end up, if I were being logical, I should have tried to put the yellow green closest to the area of focus, because the yellow green is going to draw more attention. Which may be why I want to do something like that for the little shamrocks on his hat. Although gold also has yellow, so it should have the same effect. And I could give him crazy green eyes like Michael did using this color, and that would help. I love how Michael's version of this guy looks like he's been into the shrooms. Or he's like hypnotizing you with his crazy swirly eyes. I didn't end up painting darker paint under there, and I should do that. I'm actually going to print the shadow color on the liner. It might be interesting to do the liner like a completely different color. Like dark gold colors, or even just a bit of blue liner with highlighting. But I wanted, in this case, I wanted to go lighter to provide kind of a frame around the dark parts. Like if the pants and vest and then this part are too similar in value, I feel like they're going to blur together. But typically speaking, I like to paint the insides of cloaks a darker color, because I mean it makes it's a shadowed area, because you know we're picturing the sun coming from here. A lot of sun is not getting right in there, so it's logical, and then it becomes easier to paint too. Because if you you just get enough darkness in the crevices, you don't have to make sure everything lines up perfectly, and all that kind of stuff. Give that a minute to dry and check back in on Shroomy. And now, rather than doing more wet blending, I'm just going to try to, blend in parts with wet over dry paint. And like right there, that should be more opaque. And that is actually, so we were talking about my secret. Saffron Sunset is one of my secrets for painting. Like I would use similar colors to paint red hair. And in fact, I will. That's why I got these out, to paint his beard. But then I thought, if the mushroom is also green, that's a lot of green. And I did see some orange mushrooms, and it was kind of fun. So maybe his little body should be kind of greenish. But one of the reasons this works well for highlighting these rusty reds and oranges, I think, is that it is a little more translucent. It doesn't have a lot of white in it, so it's vibrant. And the translucent makes it easier to work with. So if you're someone who's frustrated by highlighting with layering and stuff, you're going to find it less frustrating to paint like red hair or something like that. Like red hair, I actually recommend red hair for people who are starting to paint hair, and then if you want to challenge yourself, you do like the blonde triad, and I use russet red to mix the shadows. No, russet brown, not russet red, russet brown. Russet red is not a color. Russet brown to mix shadows in that color of blonde hair. And then if I end up with blonde that's too cold looking, like that's nice for, a platinum blonde doesn't actually have a lot of gold or yellow in it. And the russet brown will take care of that. But then if it ends up being too cool looking, like you want it, that it should have some yellow, I do a glaze of Saffron Sunset over the blonde, or over gold non-metallic metal. So that is kind of one of those paints that I do think of as a secret weapon, other than I do openly speak about it, so I guess it's not like a secret weapon, but it's a handy tool in my toolbox. So it's one of those colors. I don't think I've ever painted anything Saffron Sunset. Perhaps I should, just for fun, but it is a utility color. Speaking of, I don't know if you guys noticed on Reaper Live when Ron was showing the map for the Kickstarter, and there was a little section called Painter's Picks, and we may have picked some colors, and that was in some ways that was the kind of consideration we were making. Not this is my favorite blue or brown or whatever, but what are some colors that I find useful for some tasks. But then the other part, it actually ended up being way more challenging than we expected in some ways, because I went and looked up all the previous Kickstarters and eliminated any colors that we proposed that were either new or existing colors that had been included in previous Kickstarters. So that we were picking colors that none of them had been in previous Kickstarters. And, we're up to 6 now. So between new colors that were made in previous Kickstarters that we really like, or old standard colors that we really like that Anne already picked out as super useful colors for the existing paint set in previous Bones Kickstarters, it was a bit of a challenge to come up with 12 colors, 12 existing colors that weren't previously featured in Kickstarter, so that if you've been in them all, you won't feel like you're getting stuck with duplicate paints. But I shall not reveal what those colors are. Also, because do I know off the top of my head? No. No, I do not. Can I even remember one? That is a good question. I'm not sure that I can. I haven't actually been checking enough to see if I'm keeping him in frame. I probably have not been keeping him in frame. And I apologize if that is the case. Oh, my husband is telling someone the story of the time a squirrel ate our fuel pipe. And it was annoying because the way that the fuel tank in our car was made is the pipe was attached to the tank, so you had to replace the whole thing. So it was way more expensive than it seemed like it should be. And then he was telling us how they used to put something in there that the animals didn't like the taste of, but I guess it wasn't very environmental or something because they had to stop doing that. So now Toyota fuel pipes are a tasty treat, I guess. I don't know. Okay, I say now, our car is like... It's not as old as when I started painting miniatures, but it's not significantly younger than that. So I'm not going to go nuts with adding lighter layers here in the inside of the coat vest, because a lot of light would not be getting in there. So I'm just picking out some of the fun folds. probably leaving it at that. In fact, if anything, I could add more shading here, but I don't want to because I want the darker green to look darker green. So if I add too much shading to things, I am going to mix an intermediary color. I'm trying not to mix too much. Yes, a little squirrel. And then another time we had a raccoon in the attic, which I very much do not recommend that you get. Don't go out and buy one of those. It's not helpful at all. Getting the raccoon out of our attic ended up being a whole thing. In the end, I think she left because we were just too annoying as neighbors. We were like those annoying, noisy neighbors. Like we caught her once in one of the traps that the guy had, and it was like after midnight. I think it was slightly after midnight, and we're like, well, we can't call this poor guy, at midnight. Surely she'll still be there in the morning. And no, she was not. She like Hulk smashed her way out of the trap. And then he's like, well, okay, now she knows what that kind of trap is like. And we had already upgraded to like a trickier trap than he started with because she wasn't catching her. And then eventually she just left. We had bats in the attic at the same time. And he's like, don't worry about that. Bats are really easy to get rid of. They don't like the smell of mothballs or something. So once the raccoon was gone, they ran the bats off real easy. And then we put up mesh or something so that the bats couldn't come back in. I know he was supposed to bring us a bat house because I like bats and I want them to come to my house and eat the insects. I just don't want them to come in my house and eat the insects. Because the guano is not healthy for us. But he never did bring us any bat boxes. We'll have to look into that. They certainly have enough mosquitoes for them to live on. I am going to add some shading to the exterior area, which I painted a lighter color than I painted the interior area anyway. Yes, little raccoons, who I do think are cute, but they're much less cute living in your house than they are wandering around outside doing their thing. But this trap that didn't catch a raccoon, okay, well, it caught the raccoon briefly. We caught possums twice, I think. We almost caught a dog. We caught a cat. It's like, how much nature is there in our neighborhood? So I don't know if you can see that looks rough and horrible, and I'm going to be okay with that and fix it later. Normally, I probably would have made an intermediary mix, and clearly I do need an intermediary mix. But I can also rough this in and fix the edges instead of going down, making everything all pretty immediately. But it does have to not have any of that little shine of wetness before I do that. There are no bat emotes. What? That doesn't seem right. We need to get on. Bats are Halloween-y. Don't they have bat emotes just for Halloween? Now I'm just applying it in the center because that will help with the blending out as well. So I think you can see what I was talking about with the contrast, that yellowy really looks different than the green that doesn't have much yellow in it. So it helps all green has yellow in it, but the green that doesn't have as much yellow in it. So I mixed my intermediary mix, and now I'm going along the edges to try to make there be less edges. And if you want the secret of how I paint, this is it. I didn't always paint exactly this way, but be fussing at it until it looks good, until I don't see the edges. That's it. That's my whole secret. So basically, how many sanity points you're willing to spend? This is, of course, much more annoying with transparent and semi-transparent colors than it is with more opaque colors in some ways, and other ways not as much. But it's hard to come back from shadows, I guess, is what makes this harder with the semi-transparent colors. If I got shadows in the wrong places, this isn't too bad, but red is painful sometimes. I like to be more correct with red along the way, if I can. Because there you see, well, I don't know if you see for sure because this camera isn't as nice as I would like it to be. But I went back too far the other way with my light color, so then I have to come back and fiddle the shadow back in. I mean, if I want to be crazy about it. So this is but a brief sample of the kind of crazy that would occur if I was doing this for real.
Hey, Nomad Zeke. Twitch emote game needs some work. Pretty sure phone keyboards would have it. Yeah, I have to imagine that a phone keyboard would have that. Thinning down the paint is also a way to address this. So I think Anne works with a lot fewer colors than I do, but she thins them down more to make them blend together. Whereas I no longer thin at all. For Reaper paint, I mean, Reaper paint is pretty much at the consistency that works for me to do this out of the bottle. Other paint companies have a less fluid formulation, so then I would have to thin down some. And then some colors I might have to thin down as well. But I'm more likely to just make another mix than I am to thin down. I don't mind having a completely absurd amount of mixes on my palette. So hopefully you can kind of see those two have now become smoother than these two. I will not aim for perfection on this occasion. So that we can start more highlighting. So I really actually have not addressed his back here much. Which would take less, like if I was doing, well, and I guess I am kind of doing a quick tabletop version of this guy. I probably would just try to look at it from this orientation until it looks good. Instead of, if I'm being real persnickety, I'm moving it around a little. Well, not like that, because everything is going to look bad when you do that. But I might be tilting it down a little and refining the blends just a little more. But when you're painting something to look good from this angle and you want to paint it quicker, just looking at it from that angle and seeing if it looks good is a tip. there is a Batman at least, close enough. It's halfway there. Man, Bat might be more suited. Oh, right, I did mix an in-between of this because the jump from that color to Alien Goo is pretty eye-wrenching. Alien Goo does not fool around at being a yellow-green. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to lay these in kind of roughly and figure out where the placement is. And then do the make it pretty part after. And more, I like to do stuff like that. Find ways to worry about one problem at a time. So where to put the lighter colors is one problem. And then making things look pretty and smooth is a separate problem. Not that I'm never trying to do some of that along the way, but if you're having trouble trying to do all of it at once, and we will have trouble trying to do all of it once because the human brain is just not that great at that, even though we typically think we are, that is a tip. All right, we're going to go into some eye-searing colors now. So I'm not putting a lot there. The coat kind of goes under to his waist, plus the hair overhangs it, plus the hat overhangs it. So there's only going to be so much light hitting this upper torso area. I just want enough to, bring out the specific folds and shapes and stuff. So adding just that little bit up there was enough, probably. Well, here, I didn't hold that still very long, did I? That was probably enough for that area to kind of define the shape. Where I'm going to add a lot more on these flaring folds that are going to be getting more sunlight because there's nothing obscure. We have the same thing going on where this color has a little more white in it now, so it's more opaque. Also, it's possible that it's been drying a bit on my palette, although I think, well, there's been some drying. So I don't know that I think this paper works as well as the paper that's designed for this palette. But it's holding up pretty good. I'm waiting on the red grass Kickstarter as well, or I would just go buy another one of these. So I have one for kind of the show and quick projects, and one that can sit off to the side with whatever my current long form project is. So I'm going back over with more Alien Goo rather than jumping up to my next color, because sometimes it's helpful to increase the opacity of one of your sections, one of your layer sections, as to go up to the next lighter one. The next lighter one is very aggressive. I'm wondering, I think it's too much. I think I'd rather mix these. Which one did I decide is too much? Maybe Alien Goo is the one I decided is too much. Yeah, I think I was using alchemical green, and Alien Goo is almost too yellowy, I feel. So I'm going to instead mix those two together. Because I'm looking on my palette. I don't know if it'll show up on screen. But I just feel like that one is too different from the other colors. I could be wrong. I could test it to find out. Sometimes I'll just trust my judgment on that. Because I don't want it to be like safety hazard bright. That's a little much.
This is definitely going to be more opaque though, because there's obviously more white in this to make it happen. Well, I said I wasn't going to have more there, but I lied. And this is a way you can force yourself to, if you are someone who doesn't put enough contrast in your highlights and shadows, you can do this really rough to force yourself to have it, and then try and make it look smooth and pretty. And hopefully in the process you don't lose the contrast. So this is a way to push contrast. The roughing it in or blocking it in method. I feel like that paint is getting a little thick. But now I don't know if I thin it down too much. We'll find out, I guess. Possibly it's a little too thin. At least a little too thin for working fast. And this is probably why I don't do much blending on the stream, because I start concentrating and I stop saying things. Then it's probably not very interesting for you guys. Oh, and because I don't think I've mentioned it on screen recently, the thing that you aren't seeing me do, so I get fresh paint on my brush. Now some people just dip the tiny tip of their brush into their paint, and that's nice for them. I do not do that. But I have this damp sponge. You've probably seen Michael use a damp paper towel in a similar way. And that's what all these little lines are, is me kind of, and I'll form the brush tip at the same time if I'm working on detail too, or just in general. So kind of pull it off with a twisting motion, so, to make it pointy, and then it's not going in my mouth at all. Because I've made it pointy and maintained moisture in a different way. Sorry, I've said moist like 3 times today. Somebody out there is screaming. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the best. Quit cursing the sponge. I mean, eventually they get a little crusty because the paint doesn't all wash out. But I think this one's still good. And the reason the edges look all right is not because I don't use the edges, but when I'm cleaning my brushes, I use the brush soap on there, and the brush soap actually takes some of the paint off the sponge. Because that brush soap is pretty darn effective. Although I heard some weird thing. Somebody said that there's abrasives in it. So this was actually an oil painting group, but I looked it up and somebody said that they looked at this stuff under a microscope. I'm trying to figure out if we have anyone in the miniature community who has the same kind of tools that these guys had. But they said they looked at this and some other ones, and you could see abrasives in this if you looked at it on a microscope. Which, I don't know, I guess that would explain why it works well with acrylic paint, but also seems kind of weird to me. And I would like to find someone else with a microscope of that nature to look at that and confirm. Because as far as I know, this is just like one report of like one person on the internet. And I don't tend to take that as the gospel truth. I think I need to lighten this whole area up a little bit. It's flipping up and receiving more light. There. Now there's a little dent in my material probably from when I was removing the mold lines. So sometimes I'll see something that looks like not great blending, and the problem is really that there's just something about the surface that's a little different there. So sometimes you'll have to put in slightly lighter or slightly darker paint than kind of the surrounding area to cover up one of those little... Obviously, if you're not painting like a contestable miniature, this is not something you care about. So I don't know. I don't know if these greens are too different or if it works well for contrast. Sometimes colors that are too close together can look uncomfortable used in combination. But it certainly is contrast. I will say that. I'm going to do a little bit more on the edge. Because the edge is even kind of sculpted on this one, so I definitely want to have some edging to accentuate that flare. Accentuate a little bit on the inside as well. So it's not as glaring from the other side. He's not a shy and retiring type leprechaun. That's what. Well, is there a shy and retiring type leprechaun? I know. I guess they are just trying to get people to stay away from their crowd. Don't touch my gold. I suppose if we all stop doing that, they'd leave us alone. Although I imagine it depends on the myth. So I'm just coming in and doing some of that dark lining because I think, oh, well, we're almost done. I mean, it's 5, but I will go ahead and do the dark lining. And I don't know if I've thought about what I'm going to do next week. I guess I will have to ponder that. Maybe I could work on some of the Kickstarter promo guys, or I don't know. I have still been wanting to do, I kind of put it aside at Christmas because we talked about red so much at Christmas. The kind of talking about how not to paint red and green. Like if you don't want Christmas red and green, how can you use those two colors together? Because Christmas has co-opted a very effective color combination because color complements are great for contrast and stuff. But if you use like this kind of green with red, there's practically no way to make it not look like Christmas. But there are ways to use the power of green and red and have it not look like Christmas. So I've been meaning to discuss that before people just write off the power of green and red. That would probably be largely like show and tell or mixing paint or whatever. However. All right, so that's where he is. I did get through both the colors of green. I'm pretty happy about that. Wouldn't necessarily have expected to because I'm slow. But that's where the fun stippling came in. I got to speed some stuff up. And I probably need to go back in and add just a little bit of shadow here and there on his hat brim. But apart from that, I'm fairly happy. And then his little friend isn't very far along. It's just the mushroom cap. I'll have to think about how to paint the... Maybe this part should kind of be like a sickly greenish white glowy thing. Because I think the stems of those mushrooms that I was looking at were mostly lighter colors. And then that would tie it back in to his friend a little bit if we put some green there. So I don't know if any of you guys got this guy this month. He's the mini of the month. Well, and you get him and one of his friends. If you place an order, I want to say over $40 US or equivalent, you get those guys for free because they're Bones USA. And then you can just buy them if you want them. And you don't want to buy other stuff. So that's why I thought it'd be fun to paint him because it was St. Patrick's Day and he's the mini of the month. He will continue to be on sale afterwards because it's Bones USA, so they can make as many as they want. And then I had also showed you guys, if you weren't here at the beginning, what did I do with that? This is what I did last time we hung out, which was not last week, it was the week before. I was mixing skin colors from some of the new paints that have gone on sale. So that's the Oxide Yellow, Oxide Red, and Oxide Brown are kind of cheat codes for mixing skin tones if you want to have a bunch of skin tones at your disposal, but you don't want to carry around a lot of paints. I mean, they're great for leather and a bunch of other things too. I like those paints for lots of reasons. But a secret hidden reason that wouldn't be obvious when you're looking at those rusty reds and browns and stuff is that you can do this. And it's not like super tough. You need white, black, and I would say like a bright green and a bright blue. And you'll just use little touches of those and that'll be to take it down. So where this is like super red, if you add just a little bit of green to it, in fact, we can do that right now, just as a reminder for people who are here. Because since I have, so much green on my palette, when I was doing this, I used clear green, which is an excellent choice for this. But it's not like only the clears are going to work at this. They're just going to work a little more predictably. I should have left part of that not touched with green so that you can compare. So I added just a little bit of green, and it hasn't made a massive difference. I tend to start conservative because sometimes the blue and the green can be very powerful. So it's getting darker and it's getting duller. And then you're going to say, how on earth is that like skin? And then even though this is a white with green in it, we're going to take some and add it in, and bam, it's skin. And for darker ones, you add the black to the brown. So that's what we did last time. And then I'm not going to bother showing you guys the adventuring party again, because I'm sure you will be seeing so very much of them when Kickstarter fever really kicks in. So I will just leave you with these guys and wave. And I'm sure that Queenie's going to find you someone fun to watch what they're doing today. She always finds us good raids because she's super Quindy, and we love her and all her helpfulness. Well, thanks for coming, Daka Flocka Flame, and everyone else. Thanks for hanging out with me. I've gotten used to getting to hang out with friends on Monday afternoon, so that's fun for me. Quinny's still looking. Oh, the person she was going to raid went offline. Doesn't that always happen? Like, you've picked them out. Turn that off because that's in your face. And then they wander off. And I'm going to go clean some brushes now because I did dry brushing. And those are the brushes that I clean the most often. I don't clean my fancy sable brushes that often. I clean the dry brushes that get all that paint stuck up in the ferrule more often. So I think I kept them nice and wet. We'll just refresh the water on those. Oh, and that green that I showed earlier, if you like that one, just go look for Finn Greenwell on my blog that Quindy posted very recently. And you will find, I wrote down all the color numbers and stuff, so you can find the exact paints for that. And I don't think any of those were special edition or canceled paints. I can tell from looking at them, none of them were special edition. But okay, we're rating Miniac. So I will see you guys later. Have a good day.